Hello, welcome back to NIGP Radio, where the word of the day is resilience. Take a moment to think about resilience and what that means to you. I can say that this word has been around for quite a while, especially in the procurement profession. One of our colleagues and founder of NIGP Radio, Barb Johnson, she did a session many years ago, and she talked about resilience and how we as procurement professionals, we always find a way to bounce back and use our experiences to help us grow and to do better procurements in the future. So as we continue to navigate through this pandemic, let's think about what resilience can do for us and how it can help us to improve on our business processes. Let's think about resilience in a way that's going to make us better. Let's think about resilience in a way that we can share our experiences with our other procurement professionals and help make them better. So stick around and let's hear a little bit more about resilience. And perhaps we all can walk away with some new tools in our toolkit. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Legally Speaking. Today, we're going to talk about resilience. If you tuned into our last program, we talked about change and talking about change in many forms, and especially in light of the things that have happened with the pandemic. Today, we're going to talk about resilience, and that's about the capacity to recover quickly and about the capacity to make those changes more permanent. So, John, if resilience was a muscle that needs to be exercised, what do we do legally with regulations or ordinances or policies to cement or to strengthen our resilience and to cement the innovations that we've created into organizational resilience?
Yeah, that's a good aspect to think about. And I sometimes start a little intellectually, and I thought about the word resilience, and it seems to me that could mean a couple different things. There's synonyms for that word resilience. One of them is flexibility, which strikes me as meaning something where you temporarily bend to something, but you're not really fundamentally changing. And another synonym would be like adaptability, which to me means like some degree of permanent change. And so whether you're doing permanent change or temporary change, another thought that just kind of jumped out at me was the idea of there are psychological aspects or human relations aspects about managing change, but there's also technical or legal ones. So your question got me thinking about some of the legal aspects. So whether you're looking at temporarily bending or permanently changing, I realize that everything we have to do has to be legally allowed, right? You can't just necessarily make it up. And when it's not real obvious whether something's allowed, that raises the idea about legal interpretation and bringing the lawyers in. And so just to kind of go back to basics, lawmakers make laws, but then courts are the ones who get to interpret what those laws mean. And most courts in all the courts in all the different states have laid out like rules of construction that you follow when you interpret the laws. And lawyers have to follow all those rules and apply them to come up with some sort of an interpretation or legal advice about whether something's allowed. And sometimes it's not real clear, right? That's when we bring in the lawyers. It's like, well, I'm not sure if the law allows for this. I want to do this. Can you defend it? And oftentimes the lawyer is going to end up talking about the risks and say, well, it could be interpreted this way, but it could be challenged. And here are the risks and the challenges of moving ahead. And we're going to give you some legal advice about the likelihood of successfully defending against the challenge. And then it's usually up to the client to take the risk. So I think that's a big aspect of the whole thing is, are you ready to take that risk based on the advice?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And as you talked about the courts laying out the rules and setting up the rules, there's a list I'd like to show you. If you could look at this list, it's got the list of, yeah. So if you look at that,
oh, wow.
That's the list of states that apply this rule called Dillon's rule. Mm-hmm. And it's this, I mean, in my mind, it's the technical word is a pain in the something I won't say on radio NIGP, but it's this rule of strict interpretation where some lawyers will look at the rule and say, we're one of the 28 states that applied Dillon's rule, and that means you can only do what's specifically authorized by state law, and what you want to do isn't authorized. And I'm like, well, then does that mean I can't do it? And they say, yeah, it means I can't do it. But can you talk a little bit about what you do when you're faced with that kind of a situation, how you take that and respond to it, right? Because it sounds like a dead end when the lawyer says, well, we're Dillon Rule State, you can't do it, too bad.
Yeah, that's true. Where I work, like I tell our new directors, we just got a new director, and I say, you can't just make something up. We can only do the things that we've been specifically authorized to do. Might be a brilliant idea, but we have to go get that authorization. So when you come up with a new idea, when someone in your agency comes up with a new idea, or you come up with one, you might have to amend the law or add to the law before you can implement your idea. And of course, that brings up that whole idea that you and I have talked about the different levels of law. We teach it in our classes all the time. There's the legislative level of statute or ordinance, and then there's lower levels of like administrative regulations. And when you're talking about changing the law rather than just interpreting, if the interpretation doesn't stand up, then you're into that whole realm of legislative process and strategy for how to change the law. And that, then it depends on how controversial your idea is. Sometimes an idea is surprisingly easy and you just go ahead and everyone goes, oh yeah, sure, we'll change that for you. We'll change the law. Yep. So it sort of sometimes sounds intimidating from the outside, but I've seen plenty of laws that just get made by ordinary people to implement stuff, and it's not that big of a deal. Now, aside from the legislative process, I've also run into different issues where, like, procurement staff will say, hey, this doesn't work, or it doesn't seem to be authorized. We really should change it. And yet they get a little scared and they back off and say, well, we can't change the law. And I think that's really kind of the psychological dimension that we were talking about. It's part of your agency culture. Do you have an openness to change? Probably like you, I've been part of agencies and I've dealt with executives that are really at one end of the spectrum. They're really risk averse and conservative, steady managers, and they don't want to, get in the newspaper. They don't want to have any losses. But I've also dealt with other ones that I'd call really open-minded, sort of risk-taking entrepreneurs that are looking for a better way to do stuff. So, this whole idea of psychological outlook, it seems to me like it adds another aspect to that. Remember that graph that you introduced last month that shows, the amount of resistance to change will increase as the change moves from minor to more disruptive to really big. Do you have other thought? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, if you look at that evolution, I think it's really important. And as the changes that have happened over the last year reflect what might be longer term changes in society or in the way we do business, or whether it accelerated changes in society and the way we do business, I think it's really important that we keep what you were talking about before about the legislative process being open in mind, because we change the law all the time. Right. And I've been in organizations where we had a 2-year process where we physically, intentionally looked at the laws that governed what we did every 2 years and said, does this still make sense? Was this just a reaction to something? Like 2 years from now, I think we need to look back at the changes we make now and say, did we just do that because we were COVID hungover or something, and we wanted to make permanent something that made no sense? And we need to look at it and see if that's what happened. So I think it's really interesting that we look at that, but also that we don't let that stop us, and we keep in mind the things that are important and that we've learned over the last year, and we make the legislative changes, or we ask for the legislative changes that are necessary to do it, even on the state level. I mean, there's no reason why we can't change state law. There's no reason why we can't change federal law, although that's a lot more complex to get done, right? And certainly our local enabling ordinances we can change as we need to. So it's something to do. And in my organization, we do changes to our enabling legislation, our city code, every year. We look at it every year around June and enact changes in July to comply with changes that may have happened in state law, but also to conform to what we need to do in our practice.
You know, that makes me start thinking about it, though. The fact that you've been involved in it is great. And I was thinking of somebody new who maybe hasn't done that. Mm-hmm. Earlier, you brought up you asked me a question that had something to do, an analogy about, exercising a muscle. Resilience is a practice that you do. And I know how hard it can be if I try and do something major, just right out of the blue without building up to it. And so it seems to me it's kind of like good habits around exercising. So if you cultivate some sort of a culture in your agency around continuous improvement, and you find people that are open to change, and you really gather together with those people, that the more that culture develops, you get into this momentum, or you have habits that makes it really easy to find things in your policy or your law that should be changed. And it makes it easier to adopt the solutions. Even in fact, I've been in a lot of positions where I've ended up being not just a procurement guy, but kind of a cheerleader and a coach, and getting other people to step forward and say, yeah, let's go for it. Let's change the law. Does that ring true to you?
I think that's a perfect thought process. The idea that if we're continually looking to improve and to change and to modify things so they work better for us in the long run, and if we involve our legal counsel in that process, then it becomes more natural for them to support us and or help us find the way that we have to make the legislative change to create the needed change, right? And if it's something new, if you only talk to them every 5 years about making a change, then it's going to be a shock to the system, and they're going to be entrenched. So you want to move them along that continuum and help them by these regular, incremental, easy changes, be ready for the disruptive one, right? So that's the way that continuum can help if you're incrementally working together with your legal to get those changes enacted as you go. So when something big happens, you're ready for it. And then that idea, like I said, of the incremental changes, getting people used to change, so when the larger change comes, I think is great. But the other piece I want people to remember as we start to wrap this up is this idea that we made a lot of changes during this emergency, and are they the changes we really want at the end, right? Like I said, are we in a COVID hangover and we just want to move and keep doing what we've been doing in the last 6 months, or do we want to do something different? I think some organizations right now are looking at permanent change, but I think it's important to look at that permanent change as a long-term change, not just a codification of what we've done in the last year.
Those are good thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for listening. Yeah, bye.
Welcome to another month of chapter updates, where we talk about the chapterific work that goes on in all our NIGP chapters. Today, we're going to highlight both chapter members and chapter ambassadors attending NIGP's Chapter Academy. Chapter Academy is an amazing event presented by NIGP each year, providing new or rising chapter leaders with an invaluable, immersive leadership learning experience. Typically held over the course of almost 2 days in person, the event this year is virtual and spread into multiple sessions across 5 months. One of my favorite and most memorable parts of Academy each year is making connections with all the chapter leaders in attendance. Some of them will probably attest to the fact that I haven't forgotten those I've met and have probably called upon a few of those already to help make the chapter update videos. Fair warning to all of you who meet me. Not to be outdone by past in-person events, this year's Academy, led by the buoyant and energetic Peggy Hoffman, hosts 62 chapters and 113 attendees, along with the entire chapter ambassador team, many of whom you are seeing here in the background. Taking advantage of the new format, the Academy topics all continue to provide the leadership skills mixed with team building and networking presented to attendees in the past. Also, included this year are timely ideas and Jen's Gems, words of wisdom from NIGP Relations Manager Jennifer Steffen, all specifically geared to assist chapters in springing back into action or staying strong and resilient as we emerge from the restrictions of the pandemic. We hope you enjoy these chapter updates and encourage all chapters to tell us something good. If you have chapterific news to share, please send us an email at radio@nigp.org.
I'm Jason Simon from the Utah chapter of NIGP and one of the Area 9 chapter ambassadors. One of the defining characteristics of leadership is that of resiliency. All the chapters have had to exercise resiliency over the past year as they've dealt with setbacks, changed plans, and loss of funds due to COVID-19. Utilizing tools and resources to keep chapters running was paramount to surviving the pandemic and coming out stronger on the other side. The annual Chapter Academy equips chapter leaders with those tools and resources that allow them to deal with challenging and unexpected experiences. At Chapter Academy, leaders are taught how to engage membership in ways that promote and enhance their career. They are taught how to communicate clearly, effectively, and in ways that reach their memberships that they may not have thought of before. When more volunteers are needed to uplift and strengthen a chapter, leaders are taught how to connect, commit, and collaborate to create success. And my favorite part of Chapter Academy is the ability to network with leaders across the country. Resiliency requires a support system to provide guidance, advice, and feedback to help us get through those challenging times. The chapter ambassadors look forward to the day when we can get back together with our chapter leaders in person, face-to-face at Chapter Academy. Until then, stay strong and stay resilient.
Hey friends, today I'm going to share a story about 3 scientific research professors at a well-known ACC school. Basically, in my story, the professors worked on a project funded by the U.S. government. There were 3 gentlemen that worked in this particular lab. Their names were James Maloney, James Acree, and James Fraley III. The professors, they had a grant, like I said, working for a project that the feds were involved in, or that they basically funded. And Fraley owned a P card that was given to him by the university. Or the college, I guess I should say. Forgive me. So between them, the trio charged more than $250,000 worth of personal expenses on this P card. So what we're talking about is 4-wheelers, a trailer, televisions, like the big screen televisions, computers, Bose headphones, sport watches, solar panels, just all kinds of stuff. And they said $250,000, but by the time the story stopped unraveling, they had gotten the college for more than almost $1 million, or more than $1 million. In any case, in addition to the items that I listed, Maloney and Fraley also owned 6 rental properties, and they used the card to fund some renovations for those rental properties. Added to that, Fraley started sending Cash App or PayPal um, deposits to different people, his friends and family. And so they would deposit the cash and send him money back. So he was getting kickbacks off of his own P card. Okay, so worth mentioning is that when they figured out that the feds were in behind them for these P card purchases, they got together and met to figure out what they were going to do, right? This is the story we're going to tell. This is how we're going to do these things. This is what we're going to do. Fraley recorded the meeting and turned the recording over to the FBI's evidence. Remember, Fraley was in on every turn of these scams, right? He was in with the 3 of them, making those personal purchases. He was in on it with Maloney, doing the renovations to the rental properties, and it was Fraley who was getting those kickbacks, from the PayPal charges. In the end, there were 3 men indicted, all 3 of them, and they actually planned to plead guilty at the time of the indictment. This was 2016. This was some time ago. I'll share that the news outlets have been kind to these gentlemen. It is very hard to find pictures of them. It's hard to find any information. There is little known about what they received as punishment, other than the fact that they had to forfeit all the property that was purchased on those P cards. It's also worth mentioning that Georgia Tech has experienced way more problems than this with their P card program. In fact, there was another young lady, Donna Gamble, who spent $316,000 across 4,000 illegal transactions. In 2017, there was an audit of their program, which at the time had 1,700 cards in use. What was found was that Georgia Tech had the lowest compliance scores in the history of the state. So why am I discussing this? Well, here's the thing. When a P card program works well, they are a huge benefit, right? There's a soft savings that you get because you don't have to process purchase orders and gather up invoices and make payments against them. There's also revenue that comes in through the rebate programs, right? And fraud is detrimental to program goals, not just for the entity involved, but think about this. And anyone who's been in a P card program knows it, that when your administration looks up P card programs or see these types of story in the news, then they become afraid to either have a program or expand it for optimization. And so that is the big thing for this, right? Because this college had this huge program. Other people will say, no, we can't do it because there's so much risk. So how do we bounce back? Because this month we're talking about resilience, right? At the end of the day, you bounce back from fraud by putting controls in place. That's why you have liaisons. It's why you have approvers, and it's why you have administrators and auditors. And as a P card administrator for K-12 and for the state of South Carolina in my formal lives, I can tell you that this job is nonstop. You have always got to be looking to see what your P card holders are buying. And it's not enough to rely on just what the liaisons are saying and the approvers are saying, because they know those P card holders. And so they might trust them a little better. And it might make sense to them. But you, if you're in the procurement office, are sitting at a different level, and it gives you a different view of what's going on. So then there's your job or your charge to really, really put some controls in place and then also monitor them. Now, similar to Destiny's Child, excuse me, the Georgia Tech organization is made up of survivors. They bounce back nicely and seemingly enjoy a stable program now that they have those necessary controls in place. I hope that you've enjoyed this month's story. I keep an arsenal of epic stories as a reminder to myself and others because I will tell you that I may look good in black, but I'll never look good in orange. Thank you, my friends.
Let's flash back to March 2020 when the world shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As an instructor, I was supposed to be in San Jose, California, teaching a technology course. 2 days prior to the course start, my flights were canceled, the organization still wanted the class, and my extra bedroom was converted into a classroom. The first day of class was a technically challenged event as many students in the course were having issues staying connected to VPNs and the internet. Considering the number of large tech companies in the area, that was not a surprise that the technology infrastructure was taxed. As day 2 and 3 came along, their connections stabilized or they found workarounds to stay connected. So how did agencies show resiliency during these trying times? Rapid upgrades to platforms, equipment, and software, purchasing hotspots so that others could stay connected, upgrading or changing internet providers access in their own homes, finding alternate tools to get connections such as cell phone hotspots, sitting in parking lots near free Wi-Fi, or using e-tools to have materials printed and shipped to those without electronic connections. One member even added Wi-Fi 6 mesh and additional Ethernet wiring to his home just to ensure connectivity. Fast forward to today and let's do an after-action review. What can be done to help prepare for when this happens again? Procurement needs to be a leader in technology, not only with knowledge, but with their own technology. Update policies, regulations, and procedures to allow for the greatest amount of flexibility. This may even lead to local legislative changes. Ensure that we have enough of and the right kind of equipment to support a virtual workforce with the flexibility to work anywhere. Implement flexible technology such as e-procurement platforms. Provide access to multiple virtual meeting platforms to stay connected. Keep all of your technology up to date. And finally, have a backup plan. It has been a challenging year for all of us, and I hope that this tech tip leads to ideas to keep your organization resilient. Thank you.
So I know there's lots of conversations about when do I use an RFP and when do I use an ITB, and we're going to talk about that and between these experts today, and so I know that there some items lend themselves really well to invitation to for bid, and that's when you have a clear spec, multiple acceptable bidders out there, and there's very little differentiations between the product that you're buying and the and what you need, and so that lends itself well to the ITB in that the only thing that is different is really the price. So, but I also know that there are times when a request for proposals is a very reasonable method for us to use. For example, when you have a highly complex need for a software product, right? And or something that you've never done before. And there's lots of products and services out there that fall somewhere in the middle. So, Dave, how do you know when to use an ITB and when to use an RFP?
Well, they had a hard lesson a number of years ago when I was working for the city of Fort Lauderdale. I had a department that wanted a janitorial services contract. And, we in procurement are supposed to be responsible for choosing the method of solicitation. And I kind of let myself get talked into doing it as an ITB. Big mistake. Put the thing out on the street. I got it back, and it had a 30-day service test period. So I awarded to the low bidder, responsible bidder, and 5 service test periods later, uh, I had a contract in place, and going by, I was up in the main office one day, going by my boss's office, and he happened to hear me talking about it, and he says, "Please don't ever do that again." So I became a big fan of using the RFP process for janitorial services. I think it lends itself much better. You can eliminate about the bottom third of the vendor pool, and that may sound a little cruel, but we have a responsibility to give our departments a reasonably decent contractor, and it gets you higher up into the vendor pool where you can start looking at their past experience and qualifications and so on.
Yeah. So given that, Don, are there any advantages of using an ITB?
Yeah, definitely, Kevin. There's if you know what you want, if you can clearly define what you want, and there's multiple people that can get it to you, then it makes it much easier to get the bid out on the street. You can do that in hours, put together an invitation to bid in hours, whereas an RFP may take, days or weeks getting everybody involved in it. The vendors also, we have to remember that what we're paying is for their costs. And if they have to spend a whole lot of time developing a proposal, those costs are in that when we end up paying for it. So they can bid on an ITB a lot closer to the line. So it probably will save us money both in time and resources and bottom line cost. The key is you have to be able to define what it is you want,
right,
and make sure there's bidders that can bid on it. I had a similar problem with doing an ITB on janitorial, because I tried to define how many days a week they'd vacuum and
right,
how many days a week they'd wipe the mirrors, and what turned into a 30-page invitation to bid was impossible for anybody to monitor and make sure that they were doing everything they were supposed to do. So janitorial is a bad one to do in ITB.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's some disadvantages here. What are some? Let's talk about some of those disadvantages of using an ITB.
Well, certainly the one that I pointed out, the more complex the issue becomes, the more detail that you put into it, and you're asking the vendors to address it. And they all, when it's an ITB, everybody's focus tends to be on the cost. What's the bottom line?
Yeah.
And you can get caught up in that to where it doesn't fit every situation that you run into. We want to look at other things, and particularly in the case of this incident that I went through, was I should have been more concerned about the quality of the vendor and his ability to perform than the fact that anybody can get through a 30-day test period, which is the first 4 guys couldn't even do that, so it just turned into a debacle.
It may not always work, but one thing I'd like to think about is that when you're doing an ITB, oftentimes it's for a one-time purchase of an item or a quick service. You're not creating any kind of relationship or ongoing interaction. So low bid may not hurt you as much.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about, like Dave was talking about, here department, here's your new vendor that you're going to have to deal with for the next 3 years, and the first thing they think of is, oh, this is the low bid.
Yeah.
What am I going to get for it? They spend more time monitoring and doing contract administration in that case, because it's not a partnership. The vendor is trying to reduce his costs, cut his costs as much as possible,
mm-hmm.
so that he can do it for the price he bid.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the RFP, you've got more of a relationship, and
right,
both parties working together in a win-win situation.
Yep.
Let's jump to that. What are the advantages if we're? Why should we put ourselves through such a lengthy process to go to use an RFP process? And what are the advantages that we can that we can pull out of that method?
Well, certainly the fact that you're not strictly focused on cost. It's just one of 5 or 6 elements. And for complex purchases, consultants, for example, I mean, in the state of Florida, and I'm sure most other states, you can't hire an architect or an engineer without going through the RFQ process. Hiring any kind of consultant, if you're more a doctor, I had to hire medical services for a police jail that we had in Fort Lauderdale at one time. Software, very complex. It's not like you can walk into a store and go into Office Depot or Best Buy and pick up 2 boxes of software and make an appraisal of them. So you definitely, in that instance, an RFP is a perfect tool to use for complex processes because it gets you away from this focus on the low bid.
What are some other advantages?
Yeah, well, as far as it all gets back to the fact that with an RFP, you're putting out an issue, a problem,
Right.
a concern, and you're going to the experts. Basically, you're admitting up front, I'm not the expert on this.
Right.
So you're going to other people to give you solutions, and they give you the solutions, and you can ask them, okay, what risks are we going to be facing in here, and how would you mitigate those risks? So therefore, you've got their expertise on the solution, risk mitigation. You can also ask them, are there any ways that we can take in recycling or energy efficiency or
Yep.
Any of those sustainability efforts, because again, they're the experts in it. They know how to respond and what we can get out of it, rather than us trying to make stuff up or think we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, when I was early in my career, my public procurement career, I mean, I just fell right into the RFP process just because it had so much flexibility. And what sold me on it was I saw an office supply RFP was out in the street, and it was an RFP. I mean, it was used, we used an RFP process for that. And I thought, why would you we use an RFP process for office supplies? And so, but when I read through that document, there were sustainability. Ultimately, it really allows you to bring in or fold in the value of your agency into that process. And so sustainability was one, and asking for the
Service.
the proposer to share with us how would they be more sustainable in that, and diversity and all of those things in there. And believe it or not, this particular contract actually, or contractor proposed using like a bicycle messenger service to deliver office products in the core city downtown area. And so that's the kind of things, that kind of flexibility that we have.
Yeah.
And so any other advantages?
I think we've hit on most of the real advantages.
Yeah. I think it just opens you up to so many more opportunities than an ITV does whenever you have a complicated thing. And like Don said, you can get them to propose other things, and you're talking to the experts. They're the ones that do this all day long. You might buy a financial software or procurement software system once every 10 years. These guys do it every day. It's just a super tool. It really is. And I think more people should take advantage of it but you're enabling legislation, and your agency has to allow you to do it. That's important too. So
I think the biggest thing is it just adds more value.
Yes.
Definitely. I know we've got some people that still look at everything and say, well, you should be paying the lowest cost. But I think all of us have seen, even in our personal lives, the lowest cost is not what I usually go for.
Yeah.
What I look for is the most value.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, and
That's an excellent example. I tell my students that all the time. How would you buy something yourself? You know, we all have different shopping habits. Some of us go to Lord and Taylor, and some of us are happy with Walmart, and there's everything in between. You know, why isn't that a valuable consideration for an agency? You know, and we have this reputation of low bid has this negative reputation sometimes, especially in the press. And something goes south, you know, in a procurement, and by the way, they didn't choose the low bid. You know, we get hammered for that, and unfairly, I believe.
I mean, as we're chatting about this, I thought of one thing that maybe we should address here, and that is, what would you say to folks who still have fears using the RFP process?
Call me. I'm sold, and there's a lot, and I think Don is sold. I think you're sold, Kevin.
Yeah.
It's, you know, that's the beauty of NIGP. You know, you can put something up on Insight, and somebody out there, or you can go in, and I don't know if they still have the call an expert thing in the NIGP website, and you can find somebody that will walk you through an RFP.
Yeah.
Because I think we've all, if we put our heads together, we've all been through a bunch of them.
So
that and look at the best practices document.
Yes.
On RFPs, it gives some
Yeah.
pretty good guidelines on it. I think that the fear of an RFP, some people don't trust their employees to give a fair and reasonable evaluation. And quite honestly, if you don't have a strong procurement officer with strong support from above, an RFP can go south really quick.
Oh yeah,
in the evaluation stage. So
we've had abuses here in Broward County. It's years ago.
But an invitation to bid can go just as far south or further.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really is that. I mean, both methods are very viable, depending on your situation, and I think I would encourage everyone to just understand what the advantages and disadvantages of both of them, and then select one that actually is going to fit well with the solicitation that you're using or that you're doing, and the type of contract that you're looking for. And so ultimately, if you have a clear understanding of what it is that you want, and price is the only factor, then by all means use the ITB process. But if you're looking at adding value to your procurement process and adding value to your contracts in terms of getting best value, or if you're not quite sure what it is that you're wanting, or not so much wanting, but you know the end product that you want, but you're not quite sure how to get there. Why not rely on the expert? And during that process, you have the added benefit of building that relationship, that partnership, and increasing the value of that contract. So that would be the RFP process. It gives so much more flexibility, if, like Don and Dave mentioned, if you do have fear in using the RFP process, reach out through the listserv, because all of us can help. So,
great.
Thank you guys very much. Great discussion.
See you next time.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Hello, my name is Brooke Green. I'm treasurer for Gulf Coast Association. And I have to say that Chapter Academy has been super beneficial right now, because it's teaching me as a treasurer how to keep our chapter relevant and how to persevere and how to innovate in very changing times in this changing atmosphere. And I really think that a lot of the tools that I'm being given now are not only going to help me as treasurer, but they're going to help me as vice president and president and for years on end. So I think that the information we learn now is going to be exponential for later on. So I'm very grateful for that.
Hi, I'm Ginger Line, Minnesota Past President and Area 6 Chapter Ambassador. This year during Chapter Academy, I kept hearing the same question over and over again. What can my chapter do to help our members during this time? They weren't thinking of themselves. They weren't trying to do things the same way that they've always done. They knew they had to pivot and make things better for their members, especially during this time. They really had to come up with new ideas, something like virtual meetings, virtual trade shows, happy hours, treasure hunts, and more. They really tried to think outside the box and were very resilient in how to make their chapters just as good, if not better, than they were before.
Resiliency. During this edition of Radio NIGP, you've heard some great discussions about this very topic. Resiliency reveals just how strong you are as a person or how you come out on the other side after the fact. In some cases, it speaks to one's ability to be agile and adjust to an ever-changing environment. And this certainly speaks to a day in the life of a procurement professional. When considering resiliency, I couldn't help but think of some great marketing slogans that made me go, that seems to fit in this commentary. Timex told us to take a licking and keep on ticking. Head & Shoulders reminded us you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Pantene Pro V shampoo encouraged us to let the best of you shine through. An Energizer just keeps going and going and going. And bless her heart, Dory tells us to just keep swimming, but that's a whole different story for a different episode. I believe it was Perth that reminded us to bounce back wash after wash. And don't forget, you're in good hands with, you got it, Allstate. So make sure others walk away from an encounter with you experiencing your resiliency and knowing that they are in good hands with your knowledge. I would be remiss if I failed to point out the prime example of resiliency that each of us should be able to relate to. What better picture of resiliency than moms? Remember, Mother's Day is in May, so take a moment to show appreciation for your mom, those moms around you or that you may know, or maybe even your mother-in-law. In all seriousness, remember Mother's Day, just like Father's Day, shouldn't be limited to just one day a year. Let's show our appreciation throughout the year for the resiliency it takes to parent. Let's admit it. Some of us just might be paying for testing that resiliency through raising our own children. As previous generations have said, we might be paying for our raising. Let that picture of resiliency sink in for a moment. In all seriousness, friends, until next time, keep going and going and going. And remember to let the best of you shine through. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you on next edition of Things That Make You Go,